This week began with a violent escalation in the Syrian arena, continued with violent escalation in the Gaza arena, and tensions that lasted until Friday in both arenas. By Friday night, things turned for the better. Three developments over the last 2 days, both Syrian and Gazan, have significantly improved the security situation from an Israeli perspective. The first took place on Friday, when Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov was interviewed by CNN and announced that Russia is not exactly an ally of the Iranians and that Israel's security must also be taken into account. Such a statement by the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister can be seen as a diplomatic turning point in which Russia is correcting its direction. Only on Tuesday did a spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry say that the arbitrary Israeli attacks should stop. 3 days passed, and from the Foreign Ministry in Moscow, higher ranking than the spokeswoman, sang a different tune. The reason being that Russia, as strange as it may sound, needs us more than it needs Iran. The Russians have recently realized that Israel is willing to go head-to-head with the wall to thwart Iranian consolidation and increased forces in Syria, as well as the project to improve Hezbollah's position in Lebanon. The lack of ambiguity on Israel's part is also a contributor. The Russians' conclusion, apparently, is that the Iranians are dragging Israel into attacks on Syria, which could prevent Russia from fulfilling its strategic goal of stabilizing Bashar Assad's regime and start rebuilding Syria. The Russians are supposed to benefit from the country's economic and political rehabilitation. When Putin gets mad, what matters most is that the Iranians need the Russians far more than Russia needs Iran. Not only in relation to the Syrian civil war, but also in the context of sanctions imposed on it by the United States after breaking away from the nuclear agreement. Russia is the only country that currently allows Iran to export oil through it, while other countries are barely doing so because the U.S. has decided to stop sanctions on 8 countries that consume oil from Iran. Russia is the only one of the 8 countries to announce that will continue to buy oil from Iran and even market it in the world market. Meanwhile, the European countries, which initially demonstrated a desire to help export Iranian oil despite U.S. sanctions, are now abandoning Iran one by one. Moreover, France, Britain, Germany and other EU members have told the Iranians that if they do not stop developing long-range missiles, they will impose their own sanctions. This means that in a few weeks' time, Iran will be alone with Russia and Iran's economy will largely depend on Russia's goodwill. The Kremlin apparently made a quick assessment and decided to change direction. Both the Russian Foreign Ministry and the Russian military establishment want to limit Israel's air freedom, but the Kremlin thinks that the Iranians have behaved badly in recent times, and therefore the turnaround has taken place. What apparently caused the Russians to balance their policy is the report that Qasem Soleimani, commander of the Al-Quds Force of the Revolutionary Guards, was spotted on a tour in southern Syria, about 40 kilometers from the border with Israel on the Golan Heights about 10 days ago. It was a blatant violation of Iran's commitment to Russia, which Putin publicly declared that the Iranians and their proxies would keep 80 kilometers from the border, proving that the Iranians had broken their promise. Putin apparently did not like this and subsequently decided that despite the advice of his military and advisors, that they must meet their obligations, and ultimately determining that Russia did not approve of Iranian entrenchment in Syria. Iran is not an ally of Russia in Syria. This is a rather blunt statement that corrects the pro-Iranian policy that the Russians have adopted since July 2018 after the Russian Ilyushin-20 was shot down by a Syrian anti-aircraft. The basis for success and other positive development from Israel's point of view, also in the arena of Israel's northern borders, is the report published in Foreign Policy magazine, a reputably reliable publication. According to the report, the U.S. decided to leave a small force at the Al-Tanf base on the Syrian-Iraqi border, near Jordan. The base is actually an airport and a base of action for the Special Forces and Air Forces of the United States and Britain, whose main importance is that it lies near the main traffic artery and the main road leading from Baghdad to Damascus and from there to Lebanon, which is one of the two main arteries through which the Iranians have attempted to open a land corridor from Iraq through the Damascus region and from there to Lebanon. The American and British presence at the Al Tanf base allows the Western allies to control traffic on the main road and to prevent the Iranians from using the road freely in the land corridor they are trying to establish. Trump's decision to leave the base in Al Tanf intact, with little power in it, means continuing to block the western lobe of the planned corridor, which is certainly good news for Israel. For the Israel Defense Forces (IDF), there was a real fear that the Americans would leave this base, and the entire ground corridor would be open to the Revolutionary Guards to transfer people and weapons, specifically weapons to Syria and Lebanon. It is reasonable to assume that Trump's decision to leave the base active stems not only from Israeli pressure but also from Jordanian and Saudi pressure. The third positive development for Israel is the agreement reached between Qatar, the United Nations, Gaza-based Hamas and the Palestinian organizations, which will receive Qatari money that will not be transferred to Hamas but mostly be used by the UN to fund humanitarian projects throughout the Strip. Hamas can improve its image and prevent confrontation with other organizations in the Gaza Strip, as well as show that it is not selling the resistance in exchange for its employees' salaries. Israel can claim that it does not pay protection fees to Hamas or buy quiet on the fence with Qatari money. We need to see how this mechanism will work, but it is clear that the United Nations is the place by which humanitarian assistance should be provided to the Gaza Strip. Hamas has proven that it is less corrupt than Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah, but it does not know how to govern and manage the Gaza Strip. Fatah and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, on the other hand, have proven that they know how to govern and manage more or less civilian matters for the benefit of its residents. It is difficult to know what is better, a corrupt organization like Fatah but with governance skills, or a less corrupt organization but without the ability to manage the territory which it controls. The only thing Hamas really knows how to conduct is activity against Israel, and for that purpose it uses the citizens of Gaza. Therefore, the transfer of funds with the help of the UN certainly serves the security of Israel and calm in the Gaza region. In summary, we must point to the fact that just as the wheel turns, and the situation has turned upside down in the last 24 hours, it can turn back within a day or even a few hours. We live in an unstable region where many violent elements, including large and regional superpowers, are constantly stirring to promote their own interests. In such a situation, stability is the product in which there is a large, and perhaps the greatest, shortage in the Middle East. It is forbidden to bask in the turn for the better, just as it is forbidden to panic when there is a turn for the worse. You have to hold tight and keep cool. We live in a bad neighborhood, but in a well-protected villa.